Hi, Allison. This time we're going to talk about books that you recently published and about the work you published in 2017. Our viewers probably don't know, but you participated in different excavations in different projects, not only in Jordan, but in Turkey and in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So how you combine your anthropological background with digging and practical aspects of archaeology? And
so in the US, archaeology is part of anthropology. It's housed within anthropology departments. And so for me, that allowed me to think about science studies, which is within anthropology. People who do things like think about why science operates the way it does, why we reach conclusions the way we do with the scientific method, and how science itself is a cultural practice. And so that standpoint makes sense when we think about archaeology. I mean, the types of questions we ask about archaeology are definitely shaped by what we're interested in today. You know, sometimes we're really interested in gender politics, or sometimes we're really interested in particular national histories. And so I was interested in looking at those sorts of questions for archaeology in the places that I was working.
So how do you find working in three different states and probably three different cultures?
Yeah, so they each have their sort of own like idiosyncrasies or different practices or expectations. But I will say that working in a lot of different contexts has also really taught me what is shared about archaeology in different areas. Like the work of digging is underpinned by a similar sort of culture of like toughness and like sticking it out and this sort of like adventurer discovery narrative. I mean, there's a reason why like Indiana Jones isn't constrained to one particular area, right? It's because archaeology, like the mythos of archaeology is shared across places. So even though different places have different sort of maybe specific strategies, like in Kenya, we dug in arbitrary levels, so like 10-centimeter spits, versus at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, we worked in extremely like thin stratigraphical deposits, and we're very precise about the stratigraphy and the layering and the order and the phasing and everything. So those are different excavation strategies, but they both definitely had in common a lot of the same kind of culture of excavation and what it means to be an archaeologist.
When did you join the project in Petra, the Temple of the Winged Lions?
So I joined that project in 2012.
Yeah, it was almost 10 years ago.
Yep, a long time. And I worked in Bir Mithkur in Jordan 2 years before that in 2010.
So how you found the local community in Petra connected with archaeological sites and cultural heritage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the community in Petra is really deeply connected to the archaeological remains in multiple ways. There's a history of them living in the caves and the tombs around the area, which is a really fraught debate about what that means and the implications of that. So they have this like historical kind of homeland connection, and then in more recent decades, the site is the main economic generator of not just that area, but really of like the whole country of Jordan. I mean, tourism, especially to Petra, but tourism that includes Petra is a huge sector in Jordan, one of the largest sectors of the economy. And so people also have like an economic relationship to the site that I think often gets like mischaracterized as being like harmful or superficial or something, that people just want to extract money out of it. But like, I mean, we all have like jobs and we all have relationships to the work we do, and a lot of us love the work we do. And I think the same can be said for the Bedouin community. So they have a relationship to the site in terms of selling things and meeting tourists and selling donkey and camel rides. And then there is this sort of like long-term cultural connection where I think by virtue of living and working in the site, they feel pretty connected to the people who made their way living and working in the site thousands of years ago. So there's sort of this like spiritual connection, this physical like land-based connection, and this economic connection that all overlap at the site. And so that makes Petra a little bit different from other places where archaeologists might be working to really convince the community that there's something of importance under the earth. That's not the work that is really needed at Petra. I'm not saying that like vandalism or looting like never happens, but I don't think it's because people don't understand that there's something valuable there. It's because they do understand that there's something significant there. So yeah, people very much are aware that Petra is a resource, both an economic one, but not just an economic one, also like a spiritual or cultural one as well.
How much the temple of the winged lions depends on the local community and vice versa, because it's some kind of two-way street, a symbiosis between the local community and foreign researchers and scholars who spend decades working on certain projects.
Yeah, can you just ask the question one more time? You cut out a little bit on my end.
What's the interaction between the local community and scholars who work, for instance, on the Temple of the Winged Lions for decades?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a broad range of specific experiences. I think like, you know, any individual has their own memory of working with or for or just observing an archaeologist who came into the town. There are some archaeologists who worked there for a really long time who have sort of these like legendary reputations where people remember particular things about them. But what I argue in my book overall is that, you know, regardless of the specific interactions between one archaeologist and the community, because there are definitely some people who had really great relationships with the community. Kent Russell is one of those who people just remember so fondly. There are other people who come up as very well regarded. Martha Jakowski, often named as someone who people just loved. You know, so there are these names of people who come up as like extremely cherished by the community. There are also people who the community will mention as people that they don't ever want to work with again, or who they don't welcome back in Petra. What I argue in my book is that regardless of those sort of individual differences, what archaeologists overall have done in Petra is to create a sort of microeconomy, and not just in Petra, but also at other archaeological sites. They've created a microeconomy where site workers, people who are hired from the local community to work on the site, are paid more if they pretend to know less about the archaeological site. And so what I have found is that people from the local community who have expertise in Petra, but not just in Petra, also in Turkey, also in other places, if they say, oh, that artifact isn't from that era, or this area you shouldn't be digging in, it's the wrong place for what you're looking for, or you shouldn't be putting your backfill there, or whatever it is that they suggest that's in their experience, the archaeologists often will literally fire them sometimes, or demote them, or suspend them, or replace them with a family member. And so people are financially punished for offering their expertise to the archaeologists. And so I call this lucrative non-knowledge. So overall, even though people may have been well-meaning, I think archaeology, and this is sort of what I was alluding to a little bit with like a shared culture of archaeology, a lot of archaeology is very territorial, and people don't like to be corrected. And people especially don't like to be corrected by employees, by workers. And so archaeology in Petra and elsewhere has sort of operated in this way where we benefit from the expertise that local communities have. We take it. We don't want workers who are bad at their jobs. We'll fire those too. We'll fire people who are totally inept. We want people who are good at their jobs, but we also want people who aren't going to tell us that they're good at their jobs. We want people who just do their jobs, keep their head down, and stay quiet.
Yeah.
So we want docile, expert workers. And so that's created this economy where when I went in, what I was hoping to uncover was all the expertise that people had developed from working in archaeology for like 40 years in Petra. When I would say, hi, I'm an archaeologist, I'd love to know what expertise you have in archaeology, the people would just say, "Ana ma andi khibra." I don't have any expertise. I'm just a simple Bedouin, you know.
Yeah.
And I just farm my goats. That's it. I just herd my goats. That's it. Like I don't know anything about archaeology. But then if you talk to them for like even a short time, they had all of this expertise. And so I argue that the relationship between project directors, especially foreign project directors, and the local community is one where we've made it financially rewarding for people to pretend to be less knowledgeable than they are.
As I mentioned before, you published a book, Why Those Who Shovel Are Silent, in March. And can you summarize briefly what was the major idea behind that project, behind that book?
So that, like what I just described, the lucrative non-knowledge is like the crux of the argument of that book. It's based on the work I did in Petra, but also work I did at a site in Turkey. And sort of the additional layer, I think that's important, and that the contribution that I make in the book is that I look at two different sites. I look at one in Petra at a project that started in the 70s and used the labor management practices that were typical of the 70s. But then I also talked to workers from a project in Turkey where we've tried to do a lot of outreach with the local community. We've really tried to engage them and involve them in the archaeological work that's there. But what I found was that even in Turkey, people denied that they had any expertise. And so what that says is that in archaeology, we've tried to change the way we work so that we involve the local community more. Like in general, that's like a trend in archaeology to be more community integrated. But my book argues that we still haven't done that enough, because even on projects that claim to be like, socially engaged as one of their major priorities, which the project in Petra never pretended to be that way. So in some ways, it's not surprising at all that in Petra, you find that people have these memories of being sort of, I would say maybe mistreated. We find
people like Philip Hammond, he had a bad reputation amongst not only locals, but scholars. He was a real slave driver, according to some scholars who spent decades, and they're still active in Petra, and they had the opportunity to work with him. So he was a kind of a harsh guy, according to them. I'm not going to judge an expert like him, who I never had the opportunity to meet. But on the other hand, if 8 out of 10 members of his team say similar things, there might be some kind of truth in their accounts, and he might have been a kind of an old school colonial archaeologist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, attack anyone's individual character. That's not like my goal in any way. I mean, I do relate a few accounts in the book that kind of make clear that yes, he was extremely strict with the labor force and extremely strict with his students. I'm writing an article right now that talks about how he made everyone, his handbook says that he's never to be led anywhere. He always has to be followed. So you're never supposed to walk ahead of him on the archaeological site. So he was a really, tough military type guy.
Yeah.
I also don't want to, deny that he made a lot of contributions to the field of archaeology. So, but for my purposes, yeah, I did sort of use his project as a example of how we've sort of traditionally run excavations. And then I wanted to see on a project where we're not doing that anymore, have things changed at all? And it was a little bit disappointing to find people on this new project still saying the same thing, still saying, no, I'm just a simple goat herder. You know, I don't know anything about archaeology. So we haven't, the argument is that we have not changed the economy of archaeology enough. We still treat workers the exact same way that we always have. And that's a problem, I think.
At least workers are paid, but you have directors of projects who rely on students, and most of them are, or not most of them, all of them are volunteers.
Right.
They're coming there, they work on a project for 6 weeks, 8 weeks without getting a dime. But of course, it's popular to provide experience to free labor. And before they join the team, they have to sign some kind of allegiance to the director of the project. It's a written statement that they have to sign, in which they're obliged to blindly follow what's said to them and what's ordered to them. What do you think about this type of approach? I mean, as a human being.
Yeah, I haven't had to sign anything like that on the projects that I've worked on, so I don't want to like comment on something that I haven't, you know, witnessed or experienced directly. But what I do think one big issue with student and volunteer labor is that you're bringing people intentionally who have no experience, and the goal is for them to learn. But the way that they learn is by supervising people who have more experience than them. So I supervised when I was like 19. I supervised people who had like, yeah, a decade of archaeological experience under their belt. Looking back, that doesn't make any sense. You know, at the time, it felt like it made sense because it was like, oh, I'm the archaeology student. I'm the one who's formally studying this. So clearly I know more. But if I've only worked on one project before, like for 1 year, like if I've worked on one field season, there's no way I should be supervising somebody who's worked on, you know, 12 years of excavation. And yet that's the situation. So yeah, I do think there are inequities with like student and volunteer labor in this area, but I think the bigger issue, especially for like doing quality science, is the fact that people with no experience supervise workers who are paid fine, but they're paid very low wages. I think it's 10 JD a day in Jordan right now, so it's like really very low wages, and like there's no pay scale based on experience. So even if you work on a project for like 10 years, if you go to another project, you start as just a basic worker and you're being supervised by a 19-year-old. And that's normal. And we would never allow that in another science. Can you imagine in like cancer diagnostics if like, you know, an undergrad like is in charge of the scans, and somebody who's, you know, worked on the scans for 30 years is being told that they're wrong by like an undergraduate biology major? Like that's crazy. We would never allow
Crazy,
that.
of course.
Yeah, we would never.
And 10 dinar wages are not bad. If they kick me out from my work, maybe I'll consider that.
Come be a worker. Yeah, I mean, it's also seasonal. It's also dangerous. It's also, yeah. I mean, it's a pretty low wage for what you're doing. Yeah.
Steady income, especially now with Corona and with all complications that Corona involved. It's really difficult for the local community.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience about the expertise of local diggers and people who were part of these teams for many seasons?
Yeah, so the first half of my book kind of talks about the expertise they do have, because I think it's kind of like a twist then to be like, you know, they have all this expertise, but they always deny that they do. Even though my experience of it was the opposite. People would always start by saying, I have no experience, I have no experience. And then if you kept talking to them, people in the local community around Petra know about dating pottery. They can look at sherds and like tell you what period they're from. Because again, not something that like an undergraduate coming for the first time do. They have expertise about sites, both ones that have been excavated, but also new sites. So there's a lot of people in the local community, and this is historically how we've found new archaeological sites for a long time, is you talk to local community members and they say, oh, like over here, there's a corner of a building that's like getting, you know, eroded away every winter when the rains come. you want to check it out, and then you do, and then there's like a temple there, you know, like that's very common. That's like, that's how archaeology has always been done. So people will know about undiscovered sites. People know about, they also like, there are people who collect artifacts, you know, and sell them. And so there's a lot of people in the local community who know where very dense deposits of artifacts are, which often means that there's a site underneath. So if you want to find a new site, people know. People know how far down to dig to find the destruction layer. So in Petra, there's like, you know, a pretty obvious destruction layer. And people know at different points over the landscape of Petra how deep down that might be. The community of the Amarine in Beda, where a lot of like Neolithic and Stone Age excavation has happened, they know a lot about stone tools and stone tool technology. They can identify those lithics, which can often be very hard to identify if you aren't familiar with like how to recognize a stone tool from just like a broken stone, because there's a lot of like naturally broken stone that looks similar. That's a skill that you develop, and they have developed it there. So there's all these different sorts of forms of knowledge they have. And then there's also the stuff that's hard to put into words, like the intangible skills, like being a good digger without breaking something is something you learn to do over time. Keeping the walls of your excavation trench flat and straight and digging, you know, flat floors, that's, or following natural stratigraphy, depending on how you're digging. That's a skill, and that's a skill that people have developed in this area. I think like sifting is a skill. Pottery washing can be seen as a skill, because there's usually in the pottery washing process, you sort of sort out pottery from things that you thought were pottery in the field that aren't. And so there is a sort of like way of seeing that you hone by doing that. So there's all these things that I think we often think of as unskilled, like digging itself, that in reality require a lot of skill, and the local community has it. And if they didn't, we wouldn't keep hiring them. So it's a little bit, I feel in some ways like I'm pointing out something that we, like a dirty little secret of archaeology. Like we all know this, but nobody really talks about it. So I don't know.
In your book, you tackle the problem of archaeological labor and relations within the team. Although recently lots of projects are community-based, and lots of archaeologists who work in the region for a long time build that kind of community archaeology. It's a shift from what we described as old school archaeology that was present in 70s. And you wrote about different trends in archaeology, or the group called post processualists was something which emerged in 1980s, 1990s. How much post processualists are different from the traditional Western archaeological approach in areas like Jordan or Turkey?
Yeah, so I think post-processualism is characterized by being aware that the archaeology we do matters to people in the present. And if it matters, then we have an obligation to do right by those people and those communities. And so I think, I think there are some differences. And I think post-processualism is really a lot of what led to the shift towards community and public archaeology. But I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't think of themselves as post-processualists who do community engagement work, and vice versa. There are post-processualists who aren't engaging with the community, or maybe aren't engaging in a meaningful way. And overall, I do feel like a lot of community archaeology work is a little bit superficial, and I don't mean that really in a negative way. Maybe a better word would be different, but like I think there's a lot of community archaeology work where it's like we'll invite the kids from the community to the site for one day for a tour, or we'll build a small site museum, or we'll I don't know, like we'll we'll have a festival, you know, for the community for one day, or, you know, like we'll, I don't know, there's a lot of sort of like craft initiatives that never really get off the ground and stuff, but like a lot of like very sort of small scale ventures that are tangential to the real archaeological work. And I think those initiatives are good, and I think we should be inviting kids to the site, and I think we should be building educational facilities about the sites where we work, and we should be doing all of that. But does it really change, like if our primary relationship between a community and the archaeologist is as like employee employer, then I think we need to think carefully about that relationship and what it means, and stop. There's a lot of like sort of hand wringing in archaeology about like, oh, the community only cares about the archaeological site as a source of money. They don't really care about it. But I think that's very patronizing, you know, like you can care about something as a source of money and also care about it. And in fact, sometimes caring about something as a source of money makes you care about the thing, you know, more. And I think it's also,
I mean, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong in taking care of the site because it's a source of income for the local community.
Exactly.
You can rely on them more seriously if they see the benefit from
exactly
preserving the site. So
exactly, make it something sustainable and like that, something that can help them support their children, and you know, all of that. So I see nothing wrong with acknowledging the economic dimensions of the archaeological work that communities do, especially when we who write this, like, you know, oh, they only care about archaeology as a source, or, you know, these sites as a source of money. Like, I also get money for doing archaeology. Like, I'm a professor, and
of course,
I'm paid to do research on these sites. So it just feels a little bit hypocritical to be like, well, they should care about it.
It's hypocritical that people who have fat salaries are complaining why those guys who work for 300 dinars are concerned about the source of their income, and why they acknowledge that the site should be protected by the local community. Also, in another book that you wrote, and you're very efficient in that regard, you wrote a book, Archaeologists as Authors and the Stories of Sites.
Mm-hmm.
When you try to argue that in general, archaeological writings are a little bit dry and not too appealing for many readers.
Exactly.
Why it's a problem with archaeology as a science? Why archaeologists have a tendency to write in a dry and dull style?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from our desire to be like other sciences and to kind of prove our legitimacy as a science. Like, I don't think writing in a boring way is unique to archaeology. I think chemists and physicists and biologists like struggle with the same issue.
Journalists.
But
also
yeah, I'm not trying to fire shots here.
If they write about different initiatives of ministries, or if they cover the prices of tomato in the souk, they're not going to produce very interesting story. Or most of them won't be able to do that. So
yeah. I mean, I think this is like not unique to archaeology, but I mean, like, I'm an archaeologist, so I can speak to archaeology specifically. And also, like, archaeology is kind of exciting and really cool, and is like a story of discovery. You know, even sort of mundane projects have like stories of discovery to them. And so I feel like we could be doing better. And I think in some ways we have a responsibility to do better, because I don't see, well, I mean, I don't know, I think like in the era of COVID hoaxing and stuff like this, it's a little bit different. But in 2012, I don't think the anti-vax community was quite as loud. I don't think we had other types of sciences being misconstrued in the way that like archaeology is so subject to like pseudo-archaeology, people who believe that like aliens built everything, aliens built the pyramids, you know, like all that sort of stuff. And if we really are concerned about that, which I think we should be, like we should be concerned about people, you know, misconstruing history, and there's often a lot of like racism embedded in those claims.
Absolutely, yeah, it goes hand in hand. People who believe in flat Earth, in aliens who built pyramids, or underwater humans who built underwater cities in the Indian Ocean, are very dangerous, and they undermine the work of real researchers, real scholars with their pseudo-archaeological and pseudo-historical rants. And, it's a global problem. Unfortunately, it's a global problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just think like we need to be writing better. And I actually think in some ways all of the COVID hoaxing and anti-vaxxer and flat earth, all of that is also inspiring other types of scientists, like natural scientists, to think about how they communicate to the public as well. Like we all need to be communicating to the public better. So my book was just about how archaeology could be doing that better. But I do think there's a lot of relevance to other fields as well, to especially like medical science needs to be communicated differently, clearly.
In that book, you argue that different writing techniques or creative writing techniques should be implemented in archaeological writing. At the universities, do they teach archaeologists to use creative writing techniques, or it's somehow neglected the field?
Yeah, I would say it's neglected, but intentionally. You know, it's not like anyone really feels like we even should be teaching that way. I think it's just an outcome of teaching that archaeology is a science and a scholarly discipline. I think creative writing, sort of in general, is pretty devalued. But when you read a really great piece of creative nonfiction, I think it's clear how powerful, you know, it can be. Like the book Hot Zone about Ebola, or reading Lolita in Tehran, you know, the book about the kind of underground girls' school that was like not allowed. I don't know. I think like really great creative nonfiction is like Devil in the White City, about the serial killer in Chicago in the late 19th century. Like they're very scattered examples, but I think creative nonfiction shows how powerful it is to tell a true story in a creative way, in like a really, you know, inventive way, and to borrow from the best of fiction writing, not by making things up. You know, the goal is never to create a super interesting fake plot. That's not, you know, we're not trying to Da Vinci Code archaeology, but we are trying to invest it with setting and characters and momentum and setup and resolution, which exists in the archaeological project. So we're not starting from scratch. It's not about making stuff up. It's just about crafting it. And I think there's a lack of attention to craft in honestly in higher education kind of period, but within archaeology education specifically as well.
Also, you worked on another side, Beit Madhur, which is around Petra. What was your experience there?
Yeah, that was my first excavation in Jordan. I enjoyed it. Andrew Smith was the project director, and I felt like my skills were taken really seriously. I started out as a volunteer and ended up sort of being promoted along the way, which felt really, really good. Yeah, it was, I really enjoyed being on the project. I was still very much in the world, in like the age of like learning. I was an undergraduate, and I'd only worked in Kenya and Virginia before that. So I'd never been to like this part of the world. And so I had to learn the like specific language and methods that people use here in Jordan. But that project is what in the first book, Archaeologists as Authors and the Stories of Sites, I write sort of an example of what a fictionalized site report could look like. I try to write vividly and engagingly, and I try to give it some momentum and drive. And that's the site that I used as inspiration for that fictionalized site report.
Do you plan to return to the same site and continue collaborating with Andrew Smith?
I don't think he's working there anymore. I'm not sure. I had heard that he hadn't. I moved on to Petra. Yeah. I don't know. I moved on to Petra after that anyway because I'm not sure. I was more interested in Petra because of the long history of excavation there. The kind of work I wanted to do was more in that realm, and I found that the project in Petra with Chris Tuttle and Sue Alcock was trying to build up a community archaeology project there. And I did hear that Andrew was trying to build that up at Beermouth Core much later, but at the time that I worked at Beermouth Core, it wasn't really on his radar quite yet. So it made more sense for me to work at Petra. So I don't have any plans to work back at Beermouth Core, but I will say I drove by it. I hadn't been back there since 2010. And my mom came to visit Jordan last week, and we drove down the Dead Sea Highway down to Aqaba, and it was very strange to see it after such a long time. It brought back a lot of memories because it's so remote, and I had forgotten how remote it's like really in the middle of
super remote with very bad infrastructure. If we can talk about any infrastructure there.
It was wild. I did not remember living there, and now I live in Amman, and like,
of course, we're privileged here.
I live in this like very nice
exactly. Every time I go, for instance, to Zarga or East Amman, if I have any business there, I feel privileged that I'm in the Northwest Amman. I don't envy people who are there. What I wanted to ask you is about Jamal. You're also involved with that site, which is significant Nabatean, Roman, and Byzantine sites with remains of churches, with remains of all kinds of buildings. What's going on with Jamal these days?
So there are a few groups that are working to submit it for consideration to be listed on UNESCO's World Heritage status. I know that the folks at the Jamal Archaeological Project are interested in that. Members of the local community are interested in that. ACOR is interested in that. SHEP is interested in that. The DOA is interested in that. So there's a lot of folks thinking about the best way to do that, to submit that proposal. And then there's a new company called Hand by Hand Heritage, and they are trying to build up the site for tourism, which is very clearly a challenge between Corona and its nearness to the Syrian border.
The Syrian border, of course.
Yeah, right. Like, I think Europeans and Americans are like technically banned from going there right now. So, or we used to be. I'm not sure if we still are. But it's an uphill battle, but the visitor center that they built, which is brand new, it opened in 2019 and obviously not much used in 2020. It has a museum built into it, and it's incredible. I mean, it's a beautiful building. Amar Hamash helped design it, so you know that it's like,
of course,
very beautiful and very well designed. So it really, like, they've basically got what they need. It'll just be about, like, I don't know, it's tough, developing a new site for tourism, because you don't want to develop services for tourists who aren't there yet, but you also don't want to have tourists there and not have services available to them. And so, like, sort of a catch-22 a little bit. I think they don't want to put too many resources into like stocking the kitchen, employing people, to provide services to tourists, or like building new buildings. Like you're not going to build a hotel in Umm Jamal right now. So they're trying to work out like homestays, but you can't do a homestay during Corona. So like there's sort of this like, it's tough. It's tough. They're trying to figure it out, but I really hope that it works out, because it really is an amazing site and would be amazing for people to be able to visit and have a bite to eat. And the community is very welcoming, so it would be really a great experience.
So you do think that Umm Jamal and sites on the northern part of Jordan are potentially interesting for tourists, because normally Jordanian tourism revolves around Jerash, of course, Petra, and that's it. If you talk about cultural sites, northeastern sites are, I would say, neglected by tourism, and places like go ahead.
Just one thing that I've noticed during Corona is that I think, maybe sort of ironically, there are more Jordanians thinking about domestic tourism than there used to be, and maybe it'll just be a short-lived sort of blip. I don't know, but like there are like hotels that I've gone to over the last few months that I've lived in Amman, when I get out of the city, and there are Jordanians staying there where there never were before. I think like Wadi Rum, I used to really pretty much exclusively see foreigners there, and I'm not saying that Jordanians never visited, but I've just been like really surprised to see how many Jordanian visitors there are and have been. I don't know. I mean, this could just be an impression and not based on statistics, but the airport was closed down for many months. People didn't really want to travel, and so like I think, I mean, right now in the US, tourism is bouncing back, but it's almost exclusively domestic tourism. And I think that happened in Jordan a little bit earlier. And I think that will really be key for Jordan, and for creating a more sustainable economy, including around tourism, would be to think about how do you appeal not just to international tourists, but how do you appeal to like the expat community living here, and how do you appeal to like West Amani families who have some leisure income to spend on visiting places. I think Qais is an example of a place that you do see Jordanians visiting Qais. So I think that's the key, is like thinking not just about how do you get foreign tourists to like stay more than a day when they come over from Israel, or how do you get the cruise ship business, or how do you like not just thinking about those people, but thinking like Iraq El Amir, I think also is another place where they've managed to appeal to Jordanians. So how do you get Jamal on that map? And the international map too, but really like how do you get it into this domestic tourism world?
And for the end, what are your plans in coming months or in 2021?
I have 2 months left in Jordan. Sadly, I would love for it to be longer. But I have a fellowship from the National Endowment of the Humanities to finish my next book by next June. So it won't be out for a little bit because it has to go through the sort of publication life cycle. But hopefully it will be finished. I'll be finished writing it by December. And that book is about these two companies that have started Hand by Hand, which I mentioned, then also Sila, which started in Petra. And they're both sort of an answer to this thing that I talked about in my last book, not my first book, my second book, that archaeology really needs to change like the way we do business. Like we need to change the economy of archaeology, or we're not going to change the type of archaeology we do. And these companies are trying to change that economy. So I've been following them for 5 years, and hopefully I'll have something important to say about how they have worked by the end of this year.
Thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, And of course, we're going to keep in touch. We'll discuss problems of local labor, and of course, we're going to discuss problem of historically contested individuals and their monuments that should be removed, and their role also should be reviewed and reevaluated, which we started in our previous conversation. I share your opinion about those figures, and it seems that in many societies, scholars should start the debate and the process of the evaluation of such figures, who, of course, some of them had positive and negative sides, but maybe negative sides prevail. From the perspective of 2021, we don't live in 1835 when even erudites were well-known racists, and they had all kinds of prejudice about people of different color or people of different creed. So we'll continue communicating. I'm very happy that you dedicated time. I'm very thankful for that, and of course, I'm going to follow your third book, and of course, fourth and fifth.
Yes, inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.